Welcome back to our deep dive, The Learner. Today, we're unpacking a pretty dense address from administration officials.
Yeah, lots to cover. It touched on everything, really international trade, domestic stuff like fraud, border security.
Exactly. So our goal here is to sort of sift through all that and pull out the key takeaways for you.
Right. We want to give you a clear picture of what they're saying, what the initiatives are, and why it might matter based on the material we looked at.
Okay, let's jump in. First up, international trade and economic policy. Sounds like a lot is happening.
Definitely. They mentioned over 75 countries showing interest in trade talks.
Yeah.
That's a lot of global activity.
Significant engagement, yeah. And the focus seems to be on, what, reciprocal and fair trade?
That's a phrase they used. It sounds like a deliberate shift, especially when they bring up that $1.2 trillion trade deficit figure.
Right, so it could mean a more maybe protectionist approach, aiming to reduce the deficit.
Potentially.
Mm.
Which, could help domestic industries, but might also raise prices here or even trigger tariffs from other countries. It's a balance.
And tariffs seem to be a big part of the strategy. They're painting it as a way to boost U.S. manufacturing, protect workers.
And also create leverage, right?
Yeah.
Leverage for negotiations to get better access to export markets down the line.
So it's sort of a multi-pronged thing, these tariffs.
That's how it's presented, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is they can spur domestic production and open doors for future deals they see as better for the U.S.
And they sound pretty optimistic about historic trade deals coming soon.
They do. And then there was that mention of a gold card and a Trump card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that about? The details are super thin in this part.
Very thin. You have to wonder, given the context, trade, immigration, could it be related to streamlining things there?
Or maybe it's some kind of economic incentive. It's hard to say.
It is. But the language suggests something they think is pretty significant, potentially transformative. We'll have to see what that actually involves.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, but still on the economy, the domestic side. Focus on Main Street.
Yeah, talk about deregulation, especially helping out small and community bankers.
Kind of rebalancing away from just the big financial players, maybe?
Seems to be the idea. Reduce the burden on those smaller institutions, free up capital for local economies. That's usually the argument for that kind of deregulation.
Interesting. But then, despite all the trade talk and potential friction, they also mentioned positive bond auction results with foreign interest.
Right, which kind of suggests that international investors still see the U.S. economy as a pretty safe bet.
So continued confidence, basically.
Yeah, that's a key indicator. Foreign demand for U.S. bonds helps keep borrowing costs down and generally signals trust.
And they also reported good inflation numbers and a big drop in energy prices.
Over 20% down since January 20th, they said, for energy. That's something people would definitely feel.
For sure. Lower energy costs help everyone, consumers, businesses. And good inflation numbers? Well, that would be positive too, suggesting price increases are maybe cooling off.
At least in the short term, yeah.
Then there was this pretty bold claim about the U.S. making, what, $2 billion a day, maybe $3.5 billion?
Yeah, those are huge numbers. You really need to know how they're calculating that, though. Is it revenue, GDP growth, profit?
Exactly. Without the context, it's just a big number. But it's clearly meant to sound impressive, highlight economic gains.
No doubt. It would be good to see the actual metrics behind those figures.
Okay, back to trade for a second. China came up. Concerns about China ripping off the U.S.
Yeah, that phrase was used, framing past trade relations as having been unfair to the U.S. And the current effort is about resetting the table.
So fundamentally changing the terms of engagement.
That seems to be the goal. Addressing what they see as unfair practices, seeking a more, quote, balanced relationship.
But they also said they want a trade deal with China, acknowledging the economic ties.
Right, so it's this complex situation. You have the strong language about past problems, wanting better terms.
But also recognizing that the two economies are deeply intertwined and a deal could be beneficial.
Exactly. Finding that sweet spot, what both sides consider fair, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, let's pivot to accountability and fraud reduction. This seemed like a major focus area.
It did. They talked about clawing back unused COVID-19 funds from states.
How much?
$1.4 billion already returned out of $4.4 billion they identified as unused. So not insignificant.
Shows a focus on fiscal responsibility, making sure money was used as intended.
Right. And recovering those funds could free them up for other things or help with the deficit.
And then the unemployment insurance fraud stuff. Wow, the numbers were just staggering.
Over $400 million uncovered since 2020. But the examples,
Yeah, examples. Payments to dead people, thousands of them older than the oldest living person. Little kids?
28,000 kids between 1 and 5 years old, apparently. And 10,000 payments to people not even born yet.
And that one. $41,000 to someone who won't be born for 129 years. I mean, how does that even happen?
It really beggars belief, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It raises huge questions about the systems that were supposed to prevent this kind of thing. Just, wow.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, they said work is underway with inspectors general, with Congress, to investigate and try to get the money back.
And they mentioned possibly changing the statute of limitations for fraud recovery, extending it, or even getting rid of it.
Yeah, which would signal they're really serious about going after these cases, no matter how long ago it happened.
Take some. A strong message.
Though it could create some legal hurdles, too, going back that far. But the intent seems clear. Recover as much as possible.
And they're projecting big savings from all this.
$150 billion in fiscal year 26, they anticipate, just from reducing waste and fraud across the government.
That's ambitious.
Yeah.
But if they pull it off, that's a lot of money saved.
It suggests a real systemic push for better financial management, better oversight. We'll see if those projections hold up.
Okay, let's talk border security and immigration. Another big topic. They reported the lowest number of border encounters ever.
In the nation's history, for the second month in a row. That's the claim.
That's a very strong statement.
It is. It's a key metric they use to show border measures are working. Of course, lots of things influence those numbers, policy, conditions elsewhere.
Sure. But they're also emphasizing enforcing existing laws and facilitating returns for people here illegally.
Yeah, a lot of emphasis on that, and they threw out a number. 20 to 21 million people needing to go home.
That's a huge number. The implications of trying to actually do that?
Immense.
Yeah.
Logistically, legally, humanitarily, it's incredibly complex.
And they mentioned using the Alien Registration Act.
Right, as a tool to potentially charge and deport people who aren't registered. With fines, too.
Is that a new law?
No, it's been around.
Yeah.
But focusing on it now suggests they might be using existing laws more actively into enforcement to pressure people to register or leave.
And they're encouraging people to use the CBP One app for registration.
Yeah, pushing the app is a way to manage the process more, maybe more orderly, using tech at the border.
Okay. And they're also working with other countries, providing plane tickets, helping with housing and food for people returning.
Collaboration with El Salvador, Colombia, Mexico was mentioned.
Yeah.
Trying to make repatriation more supported, more sustainable.
So not just enforcement, but also managing the return process.
Seems like it. Working with home countries to help people reintegrate.
And they called the whole thing a very big self-deportation operation.
That's a specific term, isn't it?
Hmm.
Self-deportation usually means people leaving voluntarily because conditions are tough or enforcement is high. Framing it that way suggests that's the intended outcome.
Interesting choice of words.
Yeah.
And lastly on this, working with governors, FEMA recommendations, secure communication facilities.
Yeah, mentioning SCIFs, secure facilities for national security communication, highlights the need for federal-state coordination on border issues.
Gotcha. Okay, let's shift to higher education. A lot going on there too, it seems.
Definitely. A review of grants and contracts, specifically looking at anti-Semitism on campuses.
And some funding already canceled or put on hold?
Pending investigation, yes. So, real financial teeth behind this review. Holding institutions accountable seems to be the goal.
And they name names. Columbia, Harvard, potentially holding back huge sums.
Hundreds of millions for Columbia, potentially billions for Harvard. They cited concerns about how campuses are handling things, these huge endowments.
Harvard's $60 billion endowment, yeah, that got mentioned. And controversial hires.
So it's not just anti-Semitism, it seems like a broader critique of university leadership and priorities.
Yeah.
Using funding as leverage.
And it's not just those two. Princeton, Cornell also mentioned.
Reportedly facing similar scrutiny. So yeah, seems like a wider trend, not just isolated cases.
And university presidents are reaching out to the administration.
Reportedly, yes.
Yeah.
Which isn't surprising, given the potential financial stakes. They'd wanted to engage, address the concerns.
Makes sense. And the Department of Education is looking into how federal money is spent with a specific focus on ending DEI initiatives.
Yeah, that was stated pretty clearly. Ending diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across agencies, and looking at how universities use federal funds in that context.
That's a major policy shift.
A very significant one, yeah. Reflects a particular viewpoint on DEI, and it's likely to have big ripple effects in universities and government agencies if fully implemented.
Okay. Moving on to law enforcement and national security, what's happening there?
Talk about increased information sharing, intel community, DHS, FBI, particularly for countering drug trafficking and targeting cartels designated as terrorists.
So, a more integrated approach,
Hmm.
breaking down silos.
That's the idea. Better coordination, better intelligence, more effective operations against those threats.
And collaborating with local law enforcement, too, through the National Sheriff's Association.
Right. Improving the info flow between local cops on the ground and the national counterterrorism effort. Locals often see things first.
Good point. Connecting the dots from local to national level.
Exactly.
They also mentioned prioritizing declassification and rooting out weaponization and politicization in the intelligence community.
Yeah, aiming for more transparency through declassification and trying to ensure intelligence work is objective, not driven by politics.
Addressing concerns about intel being used unfairly or for political gain.
That seems to be the focus there. Ensuring integrity.
What about election integrity?
Investigations underway, looking at electronic voting system vulnerabilities, and a push for paper ballots.
It's a hot topic. Lots of debate around voting methods.
Always is. Concerns about security versus accessibility, reliability. This indicates a preference towards paper trails.
And they mentioned scanning records related to the RFK and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinations for release.
Yeah, planning to release those soon. That could be historically significant, potentially shedding new light. Lots of public interest there.
Definitely. And general law enforcement actions.
Mentioned prosecutions for drug trafficking cocaine in South Florida was an example, and also targeting companies like Tesla. Significant arrests, prison sentences mentioned.
So active enforcement on multiple fronts.
Seems so. And they also noted using the Alien Enemies Act on the criminal side, which is another specific legal tool being employed.
Okay, nearly there.
Hmm.
Just a few other notable points that came up. Agriculture Secretary.
Focused on realigning the food stamp program, SNAP, to better serve those in need, they said. And also removing initiatives described as transgender, DEI, Green New Deal from the USDA.
Okay, clear policy direction there.
Reflects a specific set of priorities for that department, yeah.
And similar removals from the military.
Reported as 99.9% complete. So a near total removal of those kinds of initiatives, according to this address.
Wow, that's fast and comprehensive, if accurate.
That's what was stated.
On a lighter note, egg prices.
Down, apparently.
Yeah.
Though they noted retail prices might still jump around Easter, but wholesale prices are lower.
Good news for breakfast lovers, potentially.
Maybe?
Shipbuilding.
Rebuilding the U.S. industry is a priority. Possibly taking initial orders from other countries to kind of jumpstart it. Strategic goal there.
Makes sense. And the EPA.
The goal stated was protecting the environment while growing the economy, trying to frame it as not being mutually exclusive.
Balancing act.
That's the message.
University of Florida basketball team.
Won the national championship. They're getting hosted. A little bit of good news shout out.
Rice and student visas.
Being revoked for students involved in, quote, problematic behavior on campuses. Ties back to the earlier higher ed discussion.
Right, consequences for certain actions.
Exactly.
And finally, they highlighted cabinet collaboration and transparency.
Yeah, emphasizing that cabinet members are working well together, uniquely so, and letting the press into meetings to show openness.
Projecting an image of unity and transparency.
That seems to be the intent.
Okay, so, wow, that was a lot, the learner. As you heard, this address really spanned a huge range of issues.
It really did. From the big picture, global trade stuff, right down to, specific fraud cases, departmental initiatives, a snapshot of intense activity across the board.
Yeah, and a few key themes seemed to emerge, didn't they?
I think so.
Yeah.
Definitely this push for economic change through trade and domestic focus. A really strong emphasis on accountability, whether it's recovering funds or border enforcement.
And the whole situation with higher education funding and scrutiny is definitely something to watch.
Absolutely. It raises so many questions moving forward. What will these trade deals look like? Will the fraud recovery efforts actually yield $150 billion? How will things evolve at the border, on campuses?
Lots to keep an eye on. We hope this deep dive gave you a solid overview, the learner, and maybe spark some further curiosity.
And perhaps one final thought to leave you with. Considering that emphasis on large-scale returns of individuals here illegally, what might the downstream effects be on sectors of the U.S. economy that currently rely heavily on immigrant labor?
That's a really important question. Something with potentially significant economic and social consequences to think about.